Hello, this is Richard Cumley, creator of Captain Canuck. You are listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Richard Cumley as he discusses next year's plans for Captain Canuck in advance of Toronto Comicon 2024. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Toronto Comicon is a spectacular 3-day sci-fi, horror, anime, gaming, and comic book event in Canada that attracts thousands of people to come to the Metro Toronto Convention Centre. Originally from Oxford, England, Richard Cumley now resides in Ontario. He has worked as a commercial artist, writer, and creator since his teens. Richard has written and illustrated children's books, magazine articles, syndicated newspaper features, greeting cards, storyboards for commercials, copy and illustration for print and TV advertising, promotional videos for television. Star Rider and the Peace Machine, Steel Chameleon, Alien Angel, Trumpet, Wabbits, and Brain Quest are some of his other creations. In the comic book arena, Richard is known as a penciler, inker, letterer, colorist editor, publisher, convention organizer, and more. However, he's best known for creating Captain Canuck. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Richard Cumley as he discusses next year's plans for Captain Canuck in advance of Toronto Comicon 2024. So, Richard Cumley, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
You're very welcome.
I appreciate your time. Now, I just finished listening to your podcast chat with the Comic Book Daily guys, and they really tried to get this information out of you because next year is a huge celebration. It's a 50th anniversary of Captain Canuck. Now, I don't want to put any pressure on you at all.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what can you say about next year's big event?
Well, there's still a lot of planning going on, but I think that probably the two biggest things that we're planning to bring out next year is Captain Canuck Reborn, which I did between 93 and 96 in 4 issues, will come out as a trade paperback, all recolored, some new art in there, etc. So that's one thing that's in the works. The other thing that I'm working on right now and will be working on for at least another 3 or 4 months is a history of Captain Canuck. It's both a biography and a history of Captain Canuck from the start. I'm going to talk about, in the book, I'm going to basically talk about my life experiences getting me to that point where I started Captain Canuck, and then covering basically 50 years of doing Captain Canuck. Now, I didn't, over the 50 years, I wasn't constantly working on Captain Canuck. I did children's books and greeting cards and advertising and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I did writing for other magazines, et cetera. So, it's the 50th anniversary of when I first released issue number 1 from Winnipeg, Manitoba.
So that's going to be a lot of history to talk about.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I started, and I may end up having to pull stuff out. I mean, it's going to be interestingly. I have Mike Myers Canada, and I've been reading some of his book. He's pretty funny. I mean, I didn't realize there were some bits in there where I'm holding myself. I mean, it's but I kind of envision my book looking a bit like his. He's got lots of pictures in there. Very early in the book, he has a full-page picture of the first edition of Captain Canuck.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and he talks about it, and he talks about, growing up in Canada. He's from Scarborough. And he just, it's kind of his love letter to Canada kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Sure.
But there's lots of funny bits in there.
Yeah. I bet you could get a lot of celebrity fans who've enjoyed him over the time to have good things to say in your book, I bet you.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few suggestions like that.
Hmm.
About the regarding the 50th anniversary, and so yeah, hopefully we'll be able to pull that off too.
Absolutely. And speaking of celebrity fans, I bet you might even get Mark Critch to say something, because I was just watching
Oh
a
yeah,
recent episode of Son of a Critch, and there on the bedside reading table is Captain Canuck. I remember you
yeah,
were telling me in the past that you actually helped them out in the production with Captain Canuck. Did you not?
yeah. They wanted Captain Canuck posters and comics, etc. For dressing the set, and for his room, and etc. So yeah, I mean, we sold them some stuff. We didn't charge them for usage of the images. It just basically, for very little money, they got a bunch of stuff that they could use. So, and I was happy to provide it to them.
Well, I always get a kick whenever I see it there, because I know that's your hand in it, in that TV
Yeah,
series. So it's a great
yeah,
thing to see, that's for sure. Good Canadian stuff going on. There you go.
yeah.
So, yeah, before I continue, I should probably ask you, what are you reading today? You've got so much on the go. Do you have any time to do any reading?
I don't do. I'm a Latter-day Saint, so I read scriptures
Hmm.
almost every day. I am reading Mike Myers' book. I'm looking around for it as I speak. I know I've got it kicking around here somewhere. I don't read very many comic books, and a lot of times I tend to just skim through them. I just, unless they really grab me. So I don't read much in the way of graphic novels or comic books. I just finished rereading my mother's book called Going West with Annabelle. My mother was a writer, and the book that she got the most mileage out of was really the story of us coming to Canada.
Ah.
And yeah, and it's out of print now. It came out in '76.
Hmm.
It did really well. We often find copies of the Reader's Digest version. Yeah, I don't know if you remember that Reader's Digest used to publish condensed books. So
Hmm.
you
Yes, I do.
yeah, they're no, I'm holding it in my hand. They're brown, and on the spine, they list the books that are condensed in this particular volume. So in '77, they did a condensed version of Going West with Annabelle in one of their books. And whenever we go to garage sales or used bookstores, we sometimes find a copy of the Reader's Digest version. Getting a copy of the hardcover or the softcover editions of Going West are much harder to find. You know what I mean? It's like almost 50 years since it was first released, and it wasn't reprinted. It first came out as a serial in a publication in Canada. Then it was sold to a British publishing company, and then from there it went to back to North America in for hardcover and softcover. But she got great, and in Reader's Digest and other and magazines in England and Australia. So she got really good mileage out of it, and did a couple of sequels to it. So I'm rereading that as I'm writing working on my history and history of Captain Canuck and biography. So, and yeah, I mean, my mother was a decent writer. She wrote romance stories and articles, and I only read one of her romance stories, and I don't think she'd seen the Rockies yet, but in her story, the love interests, one lived in the mountains and one lived in the valley of the Rocky Mountains.
Yes. Wow, that's pretty
So
intriguing.
she was envisioning the Alps, in
Ah.
Switzerland. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Nobody lives in the up in the mountains in the Rocky Mountains or Banff or anywhere like that, as we all know. You know what I mean? We look up, there's no houses up there anywhere.
There you
Anyhow,
go.
it was funny to read that, knowing that, and
Sure.
but it was I think she sold it to a British magazine or an Australian magazine, and I mean, she didn't wasn't too worried because she figured most of them never, and hopefully they were so focused on the characters and their budding romance that they weren't too concerned about the logistics.
That's pretty cool stuff. We're talking here today because you're going to be tabling at Toronto Comicon 2024. So, with that in
Yeah.
mind, I wanted to ask you, what is it about conventions that you like the most?
Well. I mean, I like talking to people. I mean, and seeing old friends. I think those are kind of high up on my liking list. I have been struggling with sciatica just recently, about a month ago. It started really bothering me. So, the sitting can get to me after a while.
I'm
So
sorry to hear
that's,
that.
yeah, I know, me too.
Yeah,
So I'm hoping that, over the next couple of weeks, it's going to settle down some more.
right.
Anyway,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's what I like most
Well,
is,
good.
yeah.
Well, you've been to a lot of conventions and festivals in the past. I'm wondering, do you have any favorite memories that you can share?
Well, what comes immediately to mind is back in 2015, I did Heroes down in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was my first. Heroes is a pretty big convention, and what makes it special and what makes it different is they only have artists and writers. No actors, wrestlers, voice actors, etc. Just artists and writers. So, and when you see their lineup, it's like you look at it and say, "Who isn't here?" So, and anyways, I did that show, like I said, in 2015. I was going to go again last year. They invited me to come back last year, but my wife broke her wrists a few days before we were to leave. And so we
Oh,
had to. She's doing better.
yeah.
She's had to have surgery and see a physiotherapist, etc. But anyway, she's doing better.
Glad to hear that.
So
Glad to hear that.
yeah, so I was really busy at that Comic Con. And what was interesting to me, the people were all very nice there. I would have lineups of people holding, original sets, the original series starting in 1975. And talking to them, nearly every one of them had a Southern accent. And and I'm thinking, all the time I'm thinking, okay, like, and I asked a few of them, you ever been to Canada, by the way? No. And so I asked them why they liked the series, and I got some nice responses from them. But it was funny, it just the Southern accent alone. Just hearing that accent alone, asking me to sign Captain Canuck was kind of was funny. It was I'm not making fun of them by any means. They were very nice. So
Yeah, it's great that you have fans all the way down south. That's pretty cool.
yeah.
That's neat. So, speaking about the convention this year, I'm wondering will you have on your table? What will you be showcasing for attendees that come by?
I don't have any brand new stuff. One of the earliest pieces that I worked on was Captain Canuck number 16, which concluded the story that was begun in number 15, which was done way back in 1980, at the very beginning of 81. And then, and I didn't do any work on number 15. It was all George and Claude Saint-Amand. And I published it as a very limited black and white issue back in 2005. And then Lev Gleason published it, about a year ago, something like that, as a full color, because the coloring was done way back then, too. Wanted to kind of finish the story that was begun in number 15. So, which is why I did some more work, and we put together number 16. Number 16 also includes the story that is in the 2014 summer special that was done, written by myself and illustrated and colored by George Freeman and his wife Lori.
Yeah, that's something to look forward to for sure.
So that, and I mean, it's going to be a little bit of slim pickings because I'll have a bunch of comic books and I'll have some trade paperbacks, of course. I'm looking around as I'm talking to. Oh, I'll have some prints and posters, which are a little bit new, and I'll have sketch covers too. I'm sure I'll do a few illustrations, some sketches up in advance and take them for anybody who's interested in them.
Nice. A little bit of something for everyone. That's great. That's great. Now speaking of folks who are going to come by your table, just imagine, if you will, that someone's going to come by and they're making their first comic book. What would one piece of advice you would give to this person when they come to your table?
Okay, this is not easy to answer because it can get a little bit complicated. But so let's say they're in production, and I mean my reply, my advice to them might be different if I could see where they're at. Where in the process are they at? Are they into the art? Are they getting close to being finished, etc.? I think one of the pieces of advice I would give is for them to maybe first release it online before it went to print. Now, I mean, we all like the tactile, paper editions, but I mean, some writers and some comic book people have done well by releasing it first online in segments, not all at once, but is almost like a serial. And then at the end, combining it into and printing it as a book to sell. So that is one suggestion that I would make to them. But all the other suggestions involve things like, do everything you need to do to make it as good as possible, obviously. And it sort of depends where that person is in skill level, both in the writing and in the illustration part of it. And of course, everybody can get better. I often, when I used to teach art, I used to tell my students that I used to give advice to a guy who would come and see me about 3 or 4 times a year when I lived in Calgary in the early '80s, and I would, tell him, he would bring in his art. At the time, he was taking graphic design in Washington State. His parents were in Calgary, so he'd be up there, 3 or 4 times a year to see them, and then he'd always come by and see me and show me his latest work and ask for some suggestions and advice and how it might get better, etc. And I would suggest things like, you got to work on your hands, you got to work on your feet, the front view, side view, etc. I used to say to him, I'm not crazy about these kind of cartoony faces you put on these characters. Now, and then I tell my students, whatever I'm going to tell you, please take with a grain of salt, because that was Todd McFarlane who was
Oh
coming.
my goodness. Wow.
He was coming to see, and he didn't listen to all my advice, but he still did very, very well. So
That's very good. That's tremendous. There you go. There you go. Well, you certainly have a lot of stuff on the go. I'm wondering, where do you recommend that people go online to find out about your current and definitely your future projects?
Well, Lev Gleason, publishing Lev Gleason, I think it's just levgleason.com. I think if you punch in CaptainCanuck.com, it'll take you there as well. But Lev Gleason Publishing is, they're the publishers. Everything's coming from them. And, as far as 2025, there are plans in the work for other publications, for probably a tour, the history book, the History of Captain Canuck book. That'll all be announced on their website. So and when it's coming out. Because, at this point, I'm trying to get it done by July. It'll have to go to print and, editing and in print, etc. And hopefully it'll be published before the end of this year, but they may hold it back strictly for next year, the 50th anniversary.
Very good. Well, Richard, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
There are things happening with Captain Canuck that, there's too early to talk about. So, and hopefully next year, there'll be announcements that will hopefully be exciting. It'll be exciting for me, and we're just keeping on trucking. Can you imagine 50 years next year?
Thanks to Richard for the chat. You can discover more about Richard at levgleason.com. That's LEVGLEASON. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And remember to check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website. True North Country Comics is on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. You can follow along at True North Country Comics on most social media sites. And you can send any and all feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2024.